All right, we're going to wait about another minute before we start. We're going to wait for everybody to take their seat, so to speak. All right, what do you say we get started? So, good morning, and thank you for logging in to the Arizona Capital Times Morning Scoop. I'm Gary Grotto. I'm the executive editor of the Arizona Capital Times, and I'll be hosting today's discussion. And, a couple times a year, we've collaborated with today's sponsors, Central Arizona Project and EPCOR, to bring you the latest on Arizona's water shortage and what they're doing about it. And we'd like to thank our sponsors because without them, we wouldn't be having this discussion. So before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to introduce Terry Goddard. He's the president of the Central Arizona Water Conservation District. And morning, Terry, and welcome. And can you just give us a quick description of CAP and what it does, and then some introductory remarks for today's program?
Absolutely, Gary. Thank you. And it's a pleasure to join in welcoming folks to this our morning scoop on water. It's become a semi-annual event and provides a lot of valuable information. So CAP, as many know, but I'm sure not everybody, is a 336-mile-long canal that goes from the Colorado River near Parker all the way to south of Tucson. It's been funded by the federal government and monitored by an supervised by an elected board of 15 members who are elected from the three counties that get the service. That's Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima. So that's basically delivering water, renewable water from the Colorado River to the heart of Arizona. We serve about 80% of Arizona's population, and about 80% or more of Arizona's economy is to some degree dependent upon this water from the Colorado River. And as this panel, I'm sure, will be discussing, we're facing some very serious threats to that river, to the Colorado Basin in its entirety. Arizona is one of 7 states in the Colorado Basin that depend upon the Colorado River. 40 million people in total draw their lifeblood literally from this river. And the reality of today is that we have diminishing supplies in the river because of temperature changes in the Rocky Mountains and diminished flow into our lakes, Lake Powell and Lake Mead, and increasing demand. So it's a collision that is being dealt with. We now have 23 years of continuous shortage on the river. And I know it's kind of ironic to talk about shortage at a year that's had exceptional, way over historic records of snow and rain in the basin, and especially here in Arizona. We look at Salt River Project's lakes and they're full to overflowing. They're literally going down the Salt River now for the first time in many, many years. So that's really good news, but it doesn't say that we're at the end of this problem. And the experts in hydrology tell us that both that one swallow doesn't make a spring, and that one good year does not necessarily mean an end to the very serious problems that we've seen. In fact, in the last 23 years of this millennial drought that we call it, we've never had a good year, 2 good years come together. We've had some good years, but it always seems to revert back to a period of increasing dryness in the river. And that's the crisis that we're dealing with here today, and that I believe this panel will be in good position to discuss with questions from the audience. It's interesting. We're still waiting to hear the final results as to what the snowpack is going to result in inflow to Lake Powell. We're not sure yet. The Department of Interior has yet to come up with the final numbers. But we do believe that we've got a continuing crisis, and we're in the middle of what we call an SEIS, a supplemental environmental impact statement, commanded by the Bureau of Interior through the Department of Interior through the Bureau of Reclamation. And they basically put two bookend alternatives out for comment. And one is a continuation of the traditional way that water's been allocated in the West. And I've got to say, as the president of the CAP, that would be a disaster. It would mean that even at current levels of Lake Mead, that we would get little or no water in the Central Arizona project. That would be, I don't even want to think about the consequences that would have for the economy and the people of Central Arizona. It would be very serious. The other option is a little better, but it still is a problem. So I think what the Department of Interior is implicitly saying is you in the West need to figure out some new ways of dealing with water supply, especially Colorado River supply going forward. The old way where a very small percentage of the population, very small percentage of the economy gets the overwhelming majority of the water supply simply won't work going forward. And you've got to find some new options. And so you've got a panel of experts today that are going to examine exactly what those new options might be. That's, I think, something that should concern all of us. And I'm pleased to welcome our relatively new general manager from the Central Arizona Project, Brenda Berman, to, I think, her first morning scoop on water, along with a couple of seasoned veterans. So I believe they've got some answers. There are ways I know that Arizona can not just survive, but thrive in this reduced water environment, but it's going to be a tricky, let's say, course to sail over the next months and years. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Terry. And I just wanted to show a quick video from our sponsor, EPCOR, and here we go.
Has allowed communities in the Southwest United States to flourish in an otherwise challenging desert environment. Today, it's of flexible water treatment and recreation facilities that provide urban environments to return. Hands of growing communities.
All right, and so just a little bit more about EPCOR. It provides clean water and safe, reliable energy to communities in Canada and the United States. And EPCOR USA is one of the largest private utility companies in the Southwest and the largest in Arizona, providing clean water, wastewater, wholesale water, and natural gas services to about 800,000 people in 42 communities in 18 countries in Arizona. And I think I forgot to turn off the there we go. Where was I? 800,000 people in 42 communities, 18 counties in Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. And I apologize for letting the video continue to run. Now let's turn to our panelists, and we have, as Terry Goddard mentioned, some new faces today. One of them is Brenda Berman, and Brenda has been Central Arizona Project's General Manager since early 2023. She originally joined CAP in 2021 as the Executive Strategy Advisor, and Brenda has more than 25 years of experience working on Western water and natural resource issues. where she's been committed to finding collaborative solutions to secure reliable water supplies for communities, farms, tribes, and the environment. And before joining CAP, Brenda was the commissioner of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and the first woman to hold that position. Good morning, Brenda, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Gary. Thank you.
And next we have Sean Bradford, who's responsible for EPCOR's current and growing footprint of regulated water utility operations in the United States. Sean previously served as Senior Vice President of EPCOR Water Canada and Vice President of Corporate Services for EPCOR USA, where he developed and guided the strategic goals and objectives for EPCOR USA's long-term vision for growth. Prior to joining EPCOR USA, Sean served as Director of Public Works for the City of Goodyear. Morning, sir, and thank you for joining us.
Morning, Gary. Thank you for the invite and happy to be here.
And our third panelist is a familiar face, Tom Bushatsky, the Director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources. And he's responsible for management of the state's water supplies, including multiple planning and policy, regulatory, and permitting programs dedicated to that mission. And Tom serves as Arizona's principal negotiator on matters relating to the Colorado River. He serves in a similar role for the state and Indian water rights negotiations. Good morning, Tom, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Gary.
And I'd just like to remind our audience that we have the chat open, and it looks like you guys are already using it. And so thank you very much. And your questions add to these discussions. So I'd like to start with just, I know Terry touched on a little bit, but could Tom and Brenda, if you guys could take turns, just giving us an update on where we're at. The last time we had a water scoop or morning scoop on water, we had just gotten the declaration to the tier 2. But it's been raining a lot since, and we've got some other things going on as well. Can you talk about that?
So Gary, I'll start. So as President Goddard correctly stated, we've had a good hydrologic year in the Colorado River Basin. We're going to get some substantial runoff as compared to past years, the past couple of decades even. But we have seen in years where we've had good runoff, the next couple of years being really low runoff. So we are not out of the woods. Mother Nature has not solved our problem. We have a structural imbalance between what the long-term flow of the river has been over the last couple of decades and what we expect it to be out into the future compared to the actual demands. In the near term, Lake Powell and Lake Mead were about a quarter full each. Reclamation started a process in the fall to do a supplemental environmental impact statement to supplement their environmental impact statement from the 2007 record of decision for the operating criteria that said shortages for Nevada and Arizona. We added to those reductions in the job contingency plan in 2019. We took some emergency actions last spring to protect Lake Powell. But the short answer to all of that is it has not been enough. We need to do more, and we need long-term to deal with this imbalance between what we expect the river to provide and all the uses that have been allocated water, which is substantially more than the water we expect to have. We need to get off the kind of Band-Aid approach that we've had the last 5 or 6 years and find some long-term solutions. That process really will culminate with new operating criteria in post 2026 timeframe. Between now and 2026, though, we need to take additional reductions to supplement what Mother Nature has given us to maybe build some elevation in Lake Mead and Lake Powell, or at least to stabilize the elevation as we work on the longer term plan. And I'll stop and turn it over to Brenda.
Thank you, Tom. We've been, as you've heard, in a 23-year drought that's been exacerbated by climate change. We know we have a smaller river than we did 20 years ago, and certainly than we did 100 years ago. And we will need to make changes for that as we look out into the medium term and the long term and even the short term. And we have been. Certainly the drought contingency plan called for additional reductions from Arizona, and Arizona has met that challenge. We gave up 592,000 acre feet this year. But what we've learned is even with this wet year, we know looking out into the long term, we're going to have to come up with more. And the United States had some special programs this year. We're not used to having federal money in the Colorado River Basin, but the last 2 years have been different. And there's been special programs through the Inflation Reduction Act that have allowed many of our communities to sign up to put additional conservation on the table. And so that's what we've been doing. In fact, the CAP board just voted to approve 8 contracts with our contractors. So that's Phoenix, Tucson, Scottsdale, Gilbert, Glendale, City of Peoria, Metro Water District, DeSarco, have all stepped up and said, we understand that we need to be doing more for the river, and they have put water on the table for 2023 and 2024 and 2025. So I think what we're talking about is meeting this situation head on, and we can talk more about details about what's going on as we continue our conversation.
Now, as far as, meeting the challenges and, parties contributing and reducing water and so forth, how sustainable is that?
Well, I think you need to look at what do we need to do. So if we need to learn to live with a smaller river, I think Arizona communities are already meeting that challenge. We took a 592,000 acre foot cut this year. That's an incredible amount of water. That's over a third of CAP's supply. And we did that by communities committing to more conservation. We did that by being ready. That was voluntarily. CAP and the customers in the state of Arizona agreed to that back in 2019. I think what we're looking to in the future is more investments. And the cities are making investments in their own infrastructure and how they move that forward. The CAP board and staff have been very active in these last few years about making sure that our infrastructure can be used very flexibly. How can we move other water supplies? How can we use the infrastructure we have, integrate it throughout the state to make sure that we can move different supplies to different places? I think we're all looking at the future and what are our possibilities there.
And those investments you mentioned, they're for moving water? Is that what, or are there other investments that they've made as well?
I don't want to talk for the cities because they tell their own story in a great way.
Okay.
But I think you can see that the cities have been investing on the CAP side. We have been working with SRP and other water users in the basin about how do we make our systems more flexible? How do we allow, say, the SRP system and the CAP system to be more integrated? That would have allowed in a year like this, where we're watching water flow down the Salt River through town, maybe some of that water could have been captured. Maybe some of that water could have been used by CAP customers in the future if we can get that infrastructure integrated. So it's about thinking about all the possibilities. Where can you make smart investments? Where can you bring in water supplies?
Now, I know EPCOR is one of the parties that has, contributed water or reduced water. How did, what did you do, Sean? What did EPCOR do to contribute to the?
Yeah, in the DCP mitigation that occurred a few years back, we were one of 2 private organizations, Freeport-McMoran being the other one that put water on the table. So for our organization, we put 3,600 acre feet up as part of the DC mitigation plan to the Pinal irrigation districts. We worked on an exchange with the Arizona Water Banking Authority for storage credits. But again, I think we're trying to be a partner in all of this. And when we think about water scarcity, I think in some ways it's a real strength for this state. We have a strong legacy of dealing with water management. We've mastered how to capture, store, move, manage water for millions of people in one of the hottest places on the planet, but also one of the fastest growing areas in the country. And I think private sector companies like EPCOR are also leading that. And I think the stark reality that we all face of a future with less water for everyone has really, in some ways, Gary, been a catalyst to drive private sector innovations and investment. Things like desalination, we're looking at that. Advanced wastewater treatment, some things we already do as an organization. And then we've got a lot of experience in other parts of the Southwestern US on water conveyance. We've seen the value that that level of investment can bring to communities as well.
Tom, can you talk a little bit about the, as Terry mentioned earlier, the supplemental environmental impact statement, and we'll just call it the SEIS for short. Can you just give us a summary of that and where we are, as far as discussions with the basin states?
So yeah, Gary, in relation to the supplemental EIS, there were 3 alternatives that were proposed. They actually published this around April 11th earlier, and there's a comment period through this May 30th. The first alternative is no action, basically the status quo. But there's 2 other alternatives, 2 action alternatives. Action alternative 1 would reduce water use in the lower basin in priority. Under that alternative, CAP goes to 0. And in the worst case, as modeled by reclamation, Arizona would end up with as little as 686,000 acre feet out of its 2.8 million acre feet Colorado River entitlement, which means all but the highest priority water users on the river along the Colorado River would be cut. Alternative 2 is a little bit better, but not much better. It would cut water users proportionally across the entire lower basin. In that situation, Arizona would have between 1.7 million acre feet or 997,000 acre feet, depending on the year. Neither one of those is a very good outcome for Arizona or for the Central Arizona Project. And maybe more importantly, there have been some folks on record opposing the proportional cuts. As Terry Goddard alluded to earlier, that's not the traditional way water has been managed in the West or within the Colorado River Basin. It's been managed pursuant to priority. So it remains to be seen what alternative the federal government might pick. They'll take their comments through May 30th and are on schedule so far to have a decision sometime maybe in late July, in time for implementation in August for the following calendar year and the following water year. So those are some pretty brutal outcomes for the state of Arizona. They're brutal outcomes for the basin. And maybe just as importantly, the potential for litigation over the pro rata cuts is very high. The potential for litigation with the priority cuts is high as well. And so if litigation ensues, it's going to be very difficult for the basin states and their representatives to negotiate the future of the river while litigation is ongoing. It certainly will have a chilling effect at best, and at worst, it might shut down those negotiations. Litigation is not a very positive path. We have to avoid it.
If there is litigation, who would be suing who? Would it be the basin states suing the federal government, or the basin states fighting amongst themselves in court?
So interestingly, Gary, it's hard to predict that. There's probably enough dislike of various pieces of the draft environmental impact statement and the potential decisions. It could be the state against the federal government, states plural against the federal government, some states on one side, some states on the other. It could be state against state. It could be water users against the state, water users against water users, tribes against tribes, tribes against water users, and vice versa. It can be any number of potential outcomes in which those who use water or rely upon it might sue, but also under the environmental impact statement process, virtually anybody can challenge the outcome of that
Mhm.
environmental impact process. It does not have to be a water user, it doesn't have to be a state. Pretty much anybody can, in the United States, challenge the outcome.
Okay, and it's not going to be quick work either, right? No.
That's correct. And there's a better path forward. And,
Gary, I might jump in if that's okay.
Yeah.
I agree with everything Tom said. I underline it. The process that's set up right now is very much set up to send us to litigation, to conflict. It's my hope that what the United States meant by putting out two very controversial paths was to force us to be talking together to come up with a solution. So we have such a long history on this river. It's over 100 years old of the states coming together and finding solutions, of our communities in Arizona coming together and finding solutions together. And that's what we need to be doing. It's, it's funny because all the rules, we've been talking about for decades now, the 2007 guidelines, now the 2019 drought contingency plans that we're living under today, all those rules end in 2026. So for looking to the long term, we need to come up with new rules for how we work on this river. How do we share this river? But that's not what this process is about. This process is a year ago, when we looked at the hydrology, we thought we were in an emergency situation. We thought our reservoirs were going to drop to critical elevations, meaning dead pool, not being able to pass water. The one thing this year did do is it's given us a short reprieve that we need to use to move forward. But this entire US process is just about the next 3 years. And I think it would be a huge shame to send the basin states and the water users and environmental interests, the tribes, everyone into chaos over a 3-year deal. What I think we need to be moving forward with, and we're all very much trying, is we come up with a consensus approach to how we deal with these 3 years. And then we spend our time on what we really need to be spending our time on, which is looking past 2026. How are we going to manage this river? How do we move forward?
Now, you've got a deadline coming up as far as your discussions with the basin states, right?
So the United States put out the EIS about back in April. The comments are due on May 30th. So certainly, I think to pull together a deal for this many people, 6 million people that ultimately receive water from Central Arizona Project, including the industries and economy that rely on that. Can we do that by May 30th? I expect we might need a little more time than that. But I think what's most important is that we come together as communities in Arizona and also across the basin states, and we find that answer. That's what we do. We have not gone to litigation in this basin since the 1950s. This isn't the way to move forward.
So if you don't make the May 30th deadline, then what?
I think that we may need more time than that deadline, and that's what the US should be working on.
Okay. Now, we talked, I think Terry talked a little bit about the wet winter we've had. It was nice. It would, every time it would rain, I'd look out there and breathe a little sigh of relief. But and I didn't know this till I watched your briefing the other day that wet seasons are just generally a one-time thing around here, right? Even though I've lived here for 30 years, but the data shows that. Tom?
So first of all, Gary, what we see within our state is not exactly the same as what we see in the Colorado River Basin. So the Colorado River Basin has been more responsive in a negative way to climate change and the aridification that's going on, the drying and the higher heat. a little less so inside of our state. So we've not seen multiple good years on the Colorado River Basin. We've seen within Arizona some situations where we've had some good back-to-back years. So when you look out the window and you live in Phoenix and you're seeing it raining, doesn't mean that we're seeing the same thing up in the Rocky Mountains. And there's that disconnect. We're pretty separated from our water supply because of the reservoir systems and because of the CAP canal coming from the Colorado River. We are not planning for multiple good years. We don't plan for multiple good years within our state, and we don't plan for multiple good years on the Colorado River. We plan for the lower years, and then we take advantage of the good years when they come. And it's incumbent upon us as water managers to plan that way, because surplus is usually good and that rising tide lifts all boats, but we need to protect against the drier outcomes that unfortunately we've seen more often than not in the Colorado River Basin.
And so I think one of you mentioned that, Brenda, in fact, mentioned it, that we have never seen money come from the federal government before. How are we utilizing that money now?
So Gary, last November, the federal government put out requests for proposals for people to put their water on the block to be conserved for the benefit of the Colorado system for Lake Mead. There were two pieces to that, a bucket 1A and a bucket 1B, as the federal government described it. 1A was for a fixed price for multiple years through 2026. 1B was make a case for higher than the fixed price because of your unique situation. And a lot of that is farmers who have put their water on the table, but we've had in Arizona, farmers, tribes, cities, as Brenda described earlier, put water on the table. We know there are two agreements from Arizona water users already signed by the federal government. The Gila River Indian Community put up to 125,000 acre feet a year through 2026 on the table. Fort McDowell, Yavapai Nation, about 14,000 acre feet. The federal government's in process of approving and negotiating contracts for those other applications. It's unclear when they're going to be done and how much water they're going to create, but I think it's a substantial volume of water that can help us, again, build upon what Mother Nature has given us this last year. And on top of that, there's probably a need for additional reductions that need to come about some way. Perhaps there's local and state money that could do some compensation, or there's going to be opportunities for uncompensated conservation to occur in Lake Mead. And that all of those things have happened in the past since 2014 under various programs. So we know that it works. We know we've made a difference. I think there's something like 80 feet of water in Lake Mead since 2014, put there by Nevada, Arizona, California, and Mexico that would not have been there but for the reductions in these conservation programs that have been in place. So we know how to do this. We know we can be successful. And I think, as Brenda described, that's maybe part and parcel of our collaborative path forward for the basin states to come up with an alternative that is better than either alternative one or alternative two. And when I say better, better in both protecting the system, better in sharing the downsides of the water reductions that need to occur, and having some of it be compensated in a way that people are at least partially, if not wholly, made financially whole.
Now, Sean, I read about some of your EPCOR's, like advanced metering and other technologies that you folks have done to conserve water. Can you talk a little bit about some of that?
Yeah, and I think it's clear, listening to Tom and Brenda this morning, and I agree with everything that they're saying, is we are facing a future with less water. So it's really about finding opportunities to save the water we have, stretch those resources as far as we can. And you know, a few things that I think are a concern for us is affordability is going to continue to be a growing concern, whether you're dealing with supply chain issues or aging infrastructure. We've got new water quality concerns with things like PFAS in our groundwater supplies, which is a big part of our overall portfolio in the state of Arizona. So finding ways to manage and navigate through that is incredibly important. Advanced metering infrastructure, AMI is a technology that we're testing in a few of our districts right now. It's going to allow us to better manage the water that our customers are using. It's going to allow our customers to better manage the water that they want to take into their property. We're looking at things like push notifications so that if we start to detect a leak, we can catch it early enough in the monthly billing cycle. Let the customer know that they've got a leak. They can then go out and proactively get that taken care of, conserve that water that would otherwise just be wasted, most likely in the backyard. So there's things like that I think that we should be looking at as an industry. Certainly in EPCOR, we're looking at that technology across all of our customers. But that's just one of the things we can do to help conserve water. The other one being just investing in our aging infrastructure. We've acquired some challenged water utilities in the past couple of years. Johnson Utilities is a great example. We've cut the water loss in that district by over 50% in the short time that we've owned the assets. And that's another way that we can stretch those resources, not only to meet existing customers, but to continue to support the growth that we want to see occur across our state.
So Gary, if I can add in, under the federal program, and it's not yet been announced, there's a bucket 2. That's more about long-term efficiencies, long-term savings. We hope that gets announced soon, but within our own state, in the expanded Water Infrastructure Finance Authority, there's $200 million for conservation. I think they've set up an application process in the expanded WIF already. People ought to look at that and see what is available to them to do a lot of the conservation and efficiency items that Sean was talking about.
You know, at this time last year, Tom, we were talking about desalination plants. There was I think it was $1.3 billion, you know, allocated for water projects, new board given authority and everything. You know, from this last budget, you know, the WIFA board actually was allocated less money. What happened to all the desalination talk and you know, what we were doing last year? It just all seemed to die off in a few months.
So Gary, the WIFA board directed its staff in December to do due diligence about a proposal put forward by IDE, an Israeli company, and its partners. I think they're probably still working on that to some degree. In my role under the 1944 Water Treaty, I am the co-chair of a binational work group looking at desalination opportunities, binational desalination opportunities in Mexico. That work continues. But of course, that's a slow-moving train to some degree. We are 5 to 10 years away, at least in my mind, of having any desalination project come to fruition to start producing water with our Mexico partners. But those talks continue. Much like us on the US side, Mexico is looking at how they can also participate in greater protection for the Colorado River system. And a lot of our attention over the last year has been focused on that. But the desal work group continues to do its work with Mexico.
And Gary, I agree with Tom that desalination is a long-term opportunity for us, something that we should be continuing to invest in and look at finding those opportunities. But I think in the near term, there's a few things that I would encourage the folks that are on the call this morning to think about. Is that's making sure that you're reusing or recycling or recharging the effluent that is currently exiting all of our wastewater treatment plants. So at EPCOR, over 93% of the wastewater that we receive is put back to beneficial use. And when you look at our history in the state, we've been here a little over 11 years. We've recharged over 18 billion gallons of water back into the aquifer. That allows us to continue to use those groundwater resources to meet future and current demands. And I think that's a short putt for a lot of utilities in the state of Arizona, is making sure that the effluent that they're exiting their wastewater treatment plants today is being reused. And then I think the next step in that conversation is direct potable reuse. And again, this technology has existed for a long, long time. It's widely, I would say, effectively and safely used in countries across the world to really augment water supplies. And that's another conversation we have to start having as an industry, as a state, looking at opportunities with direct potable reuse. You saw the announcement with the city of Phoenix. And again, this is a technology that's there, that's available. And I think that's another bucket of water that we have to start looking at, making sure we're either recharging it back into the ground or having opportunities to reuse it directly to, again, continue to meet the needs of our customers.
So this question's for either Brenda or Tom, whoever wants to answer it. I mean, there's some talk in our chat about, development and is that out of your hands, as far as some people say we need to slow down development, or are you just worried about the water that we have now and making sure that we can supply what needs, or supply the needs? Tom?
I'll take the first shot, Gary. So
Yeah.
in terms of certainly housing development, my department runs a program that requires for subdivisions, and there's a specific definition of what a subdivision is, but for subdivisions that they show 100 years of renewable water supplies. Historically, there's been lots of different ways to achieve that end, including pumping groundwater and then having the groundwater replenished in a lot of cases by one of Brenda's functions at CAP. But regardless, that kind of business model is having some challenges. In Pinal County, they surfaced first. They surfaced earlier this year in the western part of Maricopa County in the Hassayampa subbasin. And so those challenges need to be addressed, but that program is controls and is a governor, so to speak, on at least home building. For other types of industry, we have conservation requirements for those industries, et cetera, but the policy makers are the ones who need to decide on how that growth moves forward, if more regulation or not needs to occur from the water side for that type of commercial industry. So I have some very specific duties to perform that relate to home building growth. I have specific duties that attach to efficiency and conservation in growth and in commercial growth. But in terms of actually citing that commercial growth, that is something that might be looked at by our policymakers moving forward.
Okay. Go ahead, Brenda.
I was just going to say, for Central Arizona Project, we're a water wholesaler. So we bring water to communities, to tribes. Almost half our water goes to tribes, and to industry such as Asarco and Freeport, water districts such as Sean's. So a lot of those growth decisions are made by those communities. They all have their own water supply. They all have their own portfolios. Colorado River, we will be living with less Colorado River. But cities often have full supplies, whether that's groundwater, whether that's long-term storage credits, whether that's other surface water supplies such as SRP and others. So it really does come down to place. I would say for Central Arizona Project, we are out there negotiating and working towards knowing that we have a stable water supply. It may be smaller in our long term, but how do we make sure that we have a stable water supply? So the communities and the districts and the tribes that depend on us will know how to invest to use that supply. So that's how I see our role here.
And Gary, as a private utility, we certainly support growth, but I think it's important that growth is done in a way that's responsible and manageable. And again, I think there's programs and processes in place to allow that to occur. Certainly when we look at the areas out in the West Valley or the southeastern part of the valley, there are challenges, but I think there's solutions that are easily accessible. There's processes in place that's going to allow those communities to continue to grow, but do it in a way that's responsible. And again, we work closely with Tom's organization. We work very closely with Brenda, and then all of the regulatory requirements so that when we're building new homes or adding commercial customers, we're doing it in a way that's responsible, not only from a water resource perspective, but just an environmental perspective.
And Sean, one of the people in the audience had asked a question about the technology, and could you please state where this technology is in use today and what's the status of it in Arizona?
The direct potable reuse?
That's the, DPR.
Yeah, so direct potable reuse is used extensively over in Asia and in the Middle East. In the United States, I think it's something that's on the forefront. I think it's something that we have to start looking at. We don't have, as an organization, we don't have any direct potable reuse in our portfolio. We do, as I mentioned, though, we have advanced wastewater treatment, and all of our wastewater, about 93-94% of it gets back into the aquifer to recharge those groundwater supplies. But direct potable reuse is something that's been used for decades in other parts of the world.
All right. And there's one thing I skipped when we were, I wanted to bring up earlier. Brenda, can you tell us about the Lower Colorado Conservation and Efficiency Program? Its origins, its aim, its status.
So you're referring to the federal government's program?
Yeah.
I think Tom mentioned it earlier. Under the Inflation Reduction Act, the United States has brought, assigned $4 billion towards short-term and multi-year conservation. They overwhelmingly said that funding should go towards the Colorado River Basin, but also other basins. But what that's allowed is, in the short term, it's allowed the United States to make those agreements with the 8 CAP customers, in addition to the Gila River Indian Community, the Fort McDowell. And those are short-term deals. Those are kind of 1 to 3 year deals. Tom mentioned bucket 2, and that's moving forward. And that's about long-term savings that can be achieved within the state. We haven't seen the rules for that yet. We're hoping to see that in the next couple of weeks. But what this funding is allowing is a chance for kind of communities to come together and not only address our short-term issue, looking at how do we make sure the river is stabilized in the next 3 years, but start building towards those long-term solutions.
And I'd like to go back to WIFA really quick, because this is a question from the audience as well. And should we be concerned with the newly passed budget pulling from WIFA's long-term augmentation fund to cover short-term projects for members? Tom?
So Gary, I believe what WIFA allows is that in the long-term augmentation fund, up to 75% of that money was reserved for bigger projects, bringing water from outside the state in, but the other 25% can be used for the things you just described in our communities. So there is some opportunity. That's the way the balance worked out when the legislation was negotiated and passed.
Okay. So what are we going to see in the near future? What are we looking at in the next couple of months?
So Gary, I think one of the key dates, at least as far as Colorado River goes, is the May 30th deadline for the EIS comments. Brenda mentioned that perhaps for the states to come together, we might need a little bit more time. But right now that deadline is May 30th. It will be very, very telling to see what the comments are. It will be very telling to see what legal positions might be embedded in the comments by very many parties throughout the entire basin. And you can imagine every stakeholder group is capable of doing that very thing. We will continue to work collaboratively, and we've been working. We've been working overtime in the lower basin with discussions since February to try to come up with a collaborative alternative other than alternative 1 or 2. And so that has been, in my mind, a very fruitful process. We are not there yet, but we will continue to try to close that gap. And that includes Nevada, California, and Arizona, the 3 lower basin states. I think there's a great opportunity there for us to take care of our own business and not have something imposed upon us by the federal government.
How are the discussions going? Can you give us any sneak peeks on what we can expect? Brenda?
I was hoping you were going to Tom with that one.
Okay.
I would say that like we are in the heart of discussions. The things are changing kind of week by week, day by day, but I would say we are, I hope, very close to putting forward a framework. We've had very strong partners in California and Nevada, and Arizona is working with all of our partners. But it's hard to say. This is work with the United States. This is work ultimately with 7 states, and we'll know a lot more. You mentioned June, maybe where will we be? I think we'll know a lot more in June.
So Gary, I can add, and we talked about this a bit in the Arizona Reconsultation Committee, et cetera. So we want to take advantage of the good hydrology, but not rely on it, and build upon what that good hydrology gave us this past winter. We want to take advantage of the federal government's Lower Colorado Conservation and Efficiency Program so that we can have compensated system conservation to help prop up the elevation of Lake Mead. And we want an outcome in which a collaborative plan would be at least as robust as the protection afforded to Lake Powell and Lake Mead as proposed in alternative 1 or 2. And more importantly, perhaps more robust than the protection created in 1 or 2. Those are the things we're kind of working towards. And you can imagine there's a lot of detail and devils involved. But again, I think those discussions have been very fruitful to date. And certainly the 3 states and all of the 3 state folks in Nevada, Arizona, and California working overtime. Federal government has been very supportive, working with us as well. And so we will continue to press as hard as we can towards that May 30th deadline and see what happens.
Thank you, Tom. And I've got another question from the audience. Is it the elected officials or the CAP GM and the president of AZWR that decides how much water our farmers can use? I know the answer to that, but go ahead.
So that's a complicated question, actually. So farmers have different water rights. Just that's the baseline. Those different water rights then equate to how much water they have available. Brenda's CAP service area farmers, their Colorado River water is gone under the tier 2 that we're in right now. Along the Colorado River, those farmers have not had a reduction of water use. Our tribal farmers along the river have not had a reduction of water use. Our tribes within CAP, the Gila River Indian community, has lost some of their water supplies, but not all of them. And they've done a lot of conservation with their water supplies and perhaps have voluntarily reduced their farming to be able to do that conservation for Lake Mead. For farmers reliant upon groundwater within active management areas, something I regulate, There are management plans. Each successive management plan requires increasing reductions in groundwater use, and it increases in efficiency. We just went through a process to create the 5th management plan, which will become effective in January 1 of, I think, 2 years from now, so, or 2025. Hope that's right. So we did that. So the question seems simple, but the answer is not as simple as that. But I would say that certainly our farmers in the Yuma area, because of market forces, are very, very efficient. In other places, efficiencies are also increasing over time within our active management areas. From a regulatory push, they are very efficient as well. There's still room. I think the state and the CAP have pilot programs to look at new drip technology, drip irrigation technology, low pressure head technology being tested in various places in our state, Maricopa County, Yuma, and on the Colorado River Indian Reservation. We've done presentations in Mexico for their farmers for this drip irrigation technology. So there are opportunities to squeeze more efficiencies out of farming. Drip may not work everywhere, but there's some opportunities there, and we will continue to push the envelope on increased efficiencies. Our farmers statewide use over 70% of our water, so there's a big bang for the buck with even a small increase in efficiency in our farming community. But we need the farm products. And so we need to also make sure we don't totally wipe out the agricultural industry.
All right, we got about 3 minutes left. I'd like to just take it around the horn with some closing statements. Sean, can you start us off?
Sure. I think this has been a very informative panel. Lots of good questions from the audience. Again, I think we've got challenges in our future. We've got some choppy water, but I think we're well positioned as a state to continue to manage our water resources. I think there are opportunities, as Tom mentioned, in the farming communities. I think there's opportunities with additional water conservation, water reuse, whether that's just recharging it back into the ground or going even further with direct potable reuse. So again, I think that there are other water resources that we can stretch to meet not only current but future demands. But we do have challenges, and I think it's incredibly important that we work together with our regulators, with industry, private and public, and all pull together in the same direction so that we can best position the state of Arizona for future success. So thank you for the opportunity today, Gary.
Thank you, Sean. Brenda.
Thank you, Gary, Sean, Tom. It's been great being on the panel with you on my first morning scoop. I guess I'll echo a lot of what Sean said, which is that we need to be determining our own path here. Yes, I think it's important to have help from the United States, to have investment that we've seen in other communities across the United States, to use that. But ultimately, long term, we need to be working on a water supply, and it's incredibly complicated. I think you've seen like a simple answer could lead us to probably hours of a simple question could lead to hours of discussion. There's nothing simple about this, except that Arizona knows that we need to chart our own future, to pull ourselves together, and to fight for a stable water supply. And I think that's what we're doing.
Thank you.
So Gary, I'll just add the following. So when the public hears something like alternative one could put CAP to 0, that's scary, right? That is a scary outcome. However, one of the things that we pride ourselves about in this state is we put our challenges out there for the public. We are transparent and we address them head on. We do not hide our challenges. Once you define your challenge, then you have opportunity to address it. We will continue to do that. From my perspective, in my department, Governor Hobbs has been very clear when she speaks about water, about transparency and addressing challenges. So what folks can do for us is educate themselves, participate the way we've seen some participation today, and make sure you are participating in a way that you understand all the facts and the law. And the law is very important. There are legal opportunities and legal constraints that guide much of what is available to us certainly me as an administrator in my department, I do have to follow the law. And sometimes people say, Tom, just do X. Unfortunately, X might not be legally available to me. And so just keep that in mind. But again, the watchword is transparency and finding ways to address what we are putting on the table as challenges.
Yeah, and thank you for that transparency. Thank you for coming on. And I just want to thank everybody who tuned in this morning and our two sponsors, Central Arizona Project and EPCOR, and Tom Bushotsky, Brenda Berman, and Sean Bradford. Thank you for taking an hour out of your very busy schedules. And, you know, I know you guys all have important work to do, so we really appreciate that. And just like to wish everybody a good day. Thank you for coming on. Bye.